imagine a machine, right? And it's just composing this generic ambient song.
Just completely algorithmic.
Right. And then it uploads that track to Spotify. But then thousands of other machines-like automated bot accounts stream that exact same song on a continuous loop.
Endlessly generating real royalty checks.
Exactly. It is a completely closed loop of culture and commerce, and, I mean, not a single human ear ever actually listens to it.
Yeah, it's a completely synthetic audience consuming completely synthetic media, and real financial value is just seamlessly extracted from the platform.
Which is wild.
Yeah.
So welcome to our latest deep dive. We are so glad you're joining us today.
We really are.
Today, our mission is to explore what I think is a rapidly accelerating crisis concerning our shared reality. We're looking at the massive explosion of synthetic media and, how our government, our society, and honestly, our own human psychology are just struggling to handle it.
Yeah, the systems are definitely buckling, and we've got a brilliant stack of research guiding us today for this.
We do. We're looking at a news report from LNGFRM on a really controversial AI regulatory freeze, plus an analysis of the digital epistemic divide from the Michigan Technology Law Review.
Which is a fantastic piece.
As it really is.
Yeah.
We've also got insights from the Berkman Klein Center on deepfakes, and this just fascinating academic paper from the journal AI and Society on a concept called the inversion.
Right. And it's a stack that takes us all the way from the immediate legislative battles happening right now in D.C. down to the philosophical shifts that are literally altering how you perceive reality itself.
Yeah. It gets deep. By the end of this deep dive, you're going to understand why simply, and fact-checking fake news is just a completely outdated strategy.
Okay.
Let's unpack this.
So to really understand the stakes of this whole synthetic media explosion, we first have to look at the environment it's actually growing in.
Right. The political landscape.
Exactly. And right now, that environment is being completely shaped by a massive battle in Washington over whether to regulate artificial intelligence at all.
Yeah. And actually, just as a quick ground rule for you listening, before we get into the policy, our sources dive into some highly charged legislative battles here and recent elections.
Very charged.
Right. So we just want to be clear that we aren't here to take sides or endorse or, critique any specific politician or party today. We are strictly looking at the mechanics of these proposals as our researchers outline them.
Because, the stakes of this AI freeze are massive no matter where you sit on the political spectrum. We just want to impartially report the contents of the source material so you can understand the underlying logic.
Exactly.
And the mechanics of this proposed freeze are really what make it so potent. So tucked away in President Donald Trump's sprawling domestic policy bill is this provision aiming to impose a 10-year federal moratorium on state-level AI regulations.
A full decade. Which in tech time is...
It's an eternity.
Right. And the federal government isn't just asking states nicely to pause either. According to the LNGFRM report, state compliance is tied directly to federal funds that are earmarked for internet infrastructure.
Yeah, the broadband money.
Exactly. If a state wants federal money to build out its broadband, it legally has to drop its local AI laws for 10 years.
And as you can imagine, this has created a fierce divide. On one side, you have the tech industry and Senate Commerce Committee Republicans who argue this moratorium is absolutely essential for global competition.
Because of the patchwork issue, right?
Right. Their underlying logic is that if you have 50 different states enacting 50 different AI laws, you create this fragmented patchwork of regulations.
Which is a nightmare for a tech company to navigate.
Exactly. They argue that navigating that fragmentation just slows down development. And stifling innovation at the state level will cause the U.S. to fall critically behind global competitors, specifically China, in the global AI race.
Well, sure, that makes sense from a business standpoint. But on the other side, you have a bipartisan coalition of 40 attorneys general who are just vehemently opposing this freeze.
40 is a massive number for a bipartisan push.
It is. And the report focuses heavily on North Carolina Attorney General Jeff Jackson. He actually used to serve in Congress, so he understands the legislative gears here, and he is terrified of a 10-year void.
Yeah, what is his main argument against it?
Well, he points out that this moratorium would immediately repeal existing state consumer protections. For instance, right now, some states have laws making it illegal to digitally clone someone's face or voice without their consent.
Oh, wow. So those laws would just be wiped out.
Gone. Jackson's primary concern is that leaving citizens entirely defenseless against weaponized AI for a decade is just reckless.
Especially considering Congress's track record.
Exactly. He notes this historical pattern where Congress has largely failed to pass meaningful regulations to protect children online or really rein in social media platforms at all.
Right. So his argument is that trusting the federal government to successfully regulate AI this time around, while legally locking states out of doing anything for 10 years, is just an unimaginable risk.
I mean, think about it. It sounds like pausing all state traffic laws for 10 years because we're waiting for the federal government to invent a perfect national self-driving car system.
That is a highly accurate way to visualize it.
Right. But in the meantime, there are no speed limits, no stop signs, and everyone is just out there driving blindfolded.
This raises an important question. What exactly happens in that 10-year void? Because the technology isn't taking a decade off.
No, definitely not.
It is evolving exponentially to fill that exact regulatory vacuum.
And we are already seeing it sprint ahead.
Yeah.
According to Ethan Zuckerman's notes from the Berkman Klein Center, politicians are actively embracing artificially generated content for their campaigns right now.
Yeah, the deepfakes and the generated audio.
Right, we're seeing tools like OpenAI's video generator, Sora, creating hyper-realistic footage. And the immediate reaction from a lot of people is, well, let's just mandate watermarks on AI videos so we know what's real.
Which sounds like a logical fix.
It does. But the research points out that watermarks are basically a superficial band-aid. Open source models can easily bypass or manually strip out those watermarks.
Yeah, the technology is just too decentralized to control through simple tagging.
Exactly. And that technological evasion really brings us to the core of David M. Barry's academic paper in AI and Society.
Oh, this paper is fascinating.
It really is. He introduces a framework that explains what is actually happening to our digital ecosystem. He calls it the inversion.
Inversion.
Yeah. It sounds like a sci-fi thriller, I know.
It really does. But the paper notes it actually started as a technical term at YouTube. Back in 2013, engineers noticed bot traffic was scaling so fast it was about to equal human traffic.
Wow.
Yeah, and the fear was that the platform's algorithm would invert, meaning it would start treating the bot behavior as the normal baseline and flag actual human behavior as the anomaly.
So the machine would essentially start catering to the machine.
Precisely.
Yeah.
But Barry argues that this inversion is no longer just a back-end glitch on a video platform. It has become our broader societal condition.
Okay, that's a big claim.
It is. To grasp this, we have to understand the shift from mechanical reproduction to algorithmic generation.
Okay, let's unpack that shift because I know it's central to his paper.
So think about mechanical reproduction, like a photograph. When you take a picture of a tree, the camera captures light reflecting off a physical object that actually exists in the real world.
Right, there's a real tree there.
Exactly. There is an original referent. But algorithmic generation, what Barry calls diffusionization, doesn't work like that at all.
How does it work?
While AI models break massive amounts of data down into static noise, and then they synthetically reconstruct an image or text based purely on mathematical probabilities.
So wait, it's not a copy of a tree. It's like a statistical guess of what a tree should look like, built from scratch out of static.
Exactly. There is no original referent. It creates what Barry describes as a state of post-consciousness, where the boundary between human thought and synthetic generation just completely blurs.
That is wild.
Yeah. And the internet is rapidly filling up with this algorithmically generated material, which researchers are often referring to as AI slop.
Okay, wait. Let me push back on this a little bit.
Sure.
Isn't this just the next version of Photoshop or CGI? I mean, we have had fake media for decades. We've had manipulated photos in magazines, airbrushed political campaigns, special effects in movies.
The manipulation isn't new.
So what makes diffusionization so fundamentally different from just a really good graphic designer using Photoshop?
What's fascinating here is the structural shift. A photoshopped image is still a discrete tool used by a human to trick another human.
Okay.
But AI generation is creating a structural, automated loop. The machine isn't just tricking us, it is creating a totally independent symbolic realm that we are forced to navigate.
Yeah.
This is where your opening example of the Spotify bots really comes into play. That is a phenomenon the paper calls automametric production.
Right, the closed loop. I was trying to wrap my head around how they actually extract money from this.
It's incredibly cynical, honestly.
Yeah. So the AI generates the ambient music, uploads it, and then bot networks stream it to trigger micropayments. The platform pays out royalties based on engagement, but the engagement itself is completely synthetic.
The human aesthetic experience has been entirely bypassed.
Completely.
It is an automated system extracting real financial value from another automated system. And when you scale that up, when the internet is flooded with synthetic articles, synthetic images, synthetic interactions, you are living inside the inversion.
The machine is generating the culture.
Yes.
Man. So if this AI slop is completely flooding the zone, it forces a structural question. What happens to the human consumers trapped in that loop?
That is the big question.
Right. When our feeds are filled with synthetic realities, how does that actually change us? Because the research suggests the real danger isn't just that we are believing lies, it's that our entire baseline for reality is fracturing.
And this takes us perfectly to the Michigan Technology Law Review article by Gilad Abiri and Johannes Buchheim.
A really heavy read, but so important.
Extremely important. They argue that society fundamentally misunderstands the true harm of fake news. We tend to view fake news through an individual lens, right? Like someone reads a false article, believes it, and makes a bad decision.
Right, like an isolated incident of being tricked.
Exactly. But Abiri and Buchheim argue the catastrophic harm is actually collective. They call it the digital epistemic divide.
The digital epistemic divide.
Yeah. Fake news actively fractures society into completely separate epistemic communities. It destroys our ability to trust the same knowledge-producing institutions.
And when we say institutions, we mean the system society built to determine what is factual, right? By the scientific method, the courts, medical professionals, traditional journalism.
Precisely. If we don't share those institutions, we don't share reality.
And the authors look at recent history to prove this. I mean, during the 2020 election and the COVID-19 pandemic, major digital platforms rolled out the most aggressive fact-checking, flagging, and content removal campaigns we have ever seen.
They really did. They tried to manually enforce the truth.
Right, and the data shows it largely failed.
It completely failed. Despite unprecedented fact-checking, 25% of the U.S. population still believe the 2020 election was stolen.
Wow.
And 15% of U.S. adults refused the COVID-19 vaccine, with a significant portion expressing this fundamental distrust of the medical establishment.
Because fact-checking only works if you actually respect the fact-checker.
Exactly.
If a quarter of the population believes the institutions doing the fact-checking are inherently corrupt, putting a little false information warning label on a post is entirely useless.
It might even backfire.
Right. It reinforces the idea that the truth is being censored.
That is the absolute core of the epistemic collapse. In the pre-digital era, mass media acted as gatekeepers.
Because broadcasting was expensive.
Right. Getting a newspaper printed and delivered was resource-intensive. And because of that scarcity, editors and journalists controlled what reached the public. They had flaws, sure, but they enforced a baseline of shared facts.
But the internet flipped the model entirely. We went from gatekeeping to gate-watching.
Yes. Information is no longer scarce. It is infinite. Now, our attention is what's scarce.
Right, so traditional media is just one tiny voice in this massive chaotic arena computing for your clicks.
And the underlying logic of the platforms themselves actively drives us further apart.
Let's talk about that logic, because it's so insidious.
It really is. The architecture of social platforms relies heavily on two mechanisms: tailoring and sharing.
Okay.
Tailoring is what creates the filter bubble. The platform's algorithm learns what keeps you engaged, and it just feeds you more and more of it.
Because it wants to keep you on the site.
Right. And this exploits a psychological vulnerability called coherence bias. Humans naturally prefer information that fits neatly into their existing worldview. We just like feeling right.
So the algorithm happily hides anything that introduces cognitive dissonance. It curates a perfectly smooth, coherent reality just for you.
Exactly. And then you add the sharing mechanism. Platforms are designed for frictionless forwarding,
which promotes highly emotive, decontextualized content. Like a nuanced 3,000-word article about tax policy does not go viral.
No, never.
But a deeply out-of-context, infuriating 10-second video, that spreads like wildfire.
And when you combine coherence bias with emotive sharing, you completely shatter common ground.
So what does this all mean?
Well, it means we are losing the ability to talk to each other.
It's like, okay, think about it this way. It's like we're not just arguing over the score of the game anymore. We're sitting in completely different stadiums watching entirely different sports, but somehow we are still screaming at each other, fully convinced we're arguing about the exact same game.
That is the digital epistemic divide perfectly encapsulated.
It's terrifying.
When you lose a shared reality, you don't just disagree with your neighbor. You begin to view them as fundamentally brainwashed or as someone operating in bad faith.
Right.
Democratic cooperation requires a shared set of facts. Without it, political opponents just turn into existential enemies.
Which is a remarkably chilling place for a democracy to find itself.
Mm.
So, if aggressive fact-checking fails, and the very architecture of the internet is driving us into these separate stadiums,
Yeah,
how do we actually fix this?
that's the million-dollar question.
Right. The sources point out that we can't just rely on the legal system to save us.
Right.
I mean, the text mentioned the multi-billion-dollar defamation lawsuits by Smartmatic and Dominion against media companies over the 2020 election.
Yeah, and defamation lawsuits are powerful tools, but they are very limited. They address specific individual harms to a company's or a person's reputation. They are not designed to fix the collective truth of an entire society. In fact, the authors of the Law Review article explicitly warn that we must abandon truth-based legal solutions.
Why abandon them?
Because if you have the government or the courts stepping in to legally adjudicate broad collective truths, you immediately violate liberal democratic values.
Oh, I see. You end up building an Orwellian ministry of truth, dictating what is real from the top down.
Exactly. You cannot mandate reality through the law. Instead, the authors argue we need trust-based structural solutions.
Trust-based.
Yes, we have to redesign the digital environment to naturally rebuild trust in shared institutions. And they outline several really specific proposals.
Let's go through those. The first one is bolstering local civil society, right?
Yes.
Basically giving traditional, locally bound media a fighting chance so they can act as trusted gatekeepers again. The source details Australia's media bargaining code, which essentially forces massive tech platforms to pay local news organizations for using their content.
Which is huge for their survival.
Absolutely. Another idea they bring up is taxing digital ad revenue to actively subsidize local newspapers.
And the mechanism here is that local news is rooted in shared physical reality.
Right, you can't fake a pothole.
Exactly. You might passionately disagree on national politics, but you and your neighbor both know if the local bridge is closed or if the city council raised taxes. Rebuilding trust has to start at the local level.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, a second proposal involves nudging. The idea here is to mandate that digital platforms feature a transparent list of trusted sources prominently in your feed.
But crucially, and this is to avoid that Ministry of Truth problem, this list cannot be dictated by the federal government.
Right.
It has to be determined by the platforms through a public, transparent stakeholder process.
So it's visible but not state mandated.
Exactly. The sources also suggest counteracting the platform logic directly by adding friction back into the system.
Friction, like slowing things down.
Yes. For instance, looking at how WhatsApp limited the speed and volume of message forwarding. Oh, right. They did that a few years ago.
Yeah. By simply capping how many people you could forward a message to at once, they dramatically slowed down the viral spread of rumors. They basically gave users a microsecond to actually think before sharing.
That's brilliant. But there's a much more radical proposal in here to counteract the algorithm.
Oh, the 20% rule.
Yeah. Mandating that 20% of a user's feed must be randomly selected from outside their tailored network. The goal is to intentionally break the echo chamber.
Right.
But let me challenge that for a second. Wouldn't forcing 20% random content into our feeds just make people angry?
What do you mean?
Well, if I've spent years perfectly curating my feed to show me, specific hobbies and my exact political views, suddenly seeing the complete opposite is going to feel like a system glitch.
Yeah.
I'm just going to scroll past it or honestly get annoyed.
If we connect this to the bigger picture,
Yeah.
that friction is exactly the point.
The annoyance is the point. Yes. The anger or confusion you feel is a symptom of how isolated we've become. Think about the physical world. When you walk down a busy public street, you are forced to see people, situations, and realities that exist entirely outside of your private bubble.
That's true.
You might see a protest, you might pass someone struggling, you might overhear a conversation you vehemently disagree with.
And you can't just swipe left on a person standing on the sidewalk.
You can't. That unavoidable friction is what physically grounds us in a shared society. It forces us to acknowledge that other perspectives exist.
And we've just completely engineered that friction out of our online lives.
Completely. We need to digitally recreate that shared, unavoidable reality in order to socially coordinate again.
Wow. And finally, the sources suggest we don't even have to wait for platforms to change. There's a push for grassroots resistance, which the texts call algorithmic determined.
Yes, it's a method of reclaiming human agency, repurposing the systems that are trying to categorize you.
Like hacking the system almost.
Kind of. It's about building federated, decentralized networks, engaging in perma-computing, and just intentionally stepping outside the massive walled gardens of corporate platform ecosystems entirely.
Right. It is an active refusal to let an algorithm dictate the boundaries of your world.
Exactly.
Okay, let's bring all of this together. We are looking at a highly volatile landscape. We are facing a potential 10-year federal freeze on AI regulation, meaning states could be locked out of protecting their citizens right at the exact moment when the inversion is taking hold.
Right, as the technology is exploding.
Exactly. We're watching synthetic media automate our culture, creating closed loops of value that bypass humans entirely. And all of this is widening a profound digital epistemic divide, trapping us in these perfectly tailored filter bubbles where we can't even agree on basic institutional facts.
The stakes for how we function as a cohesive society are immense.
They really are. And for you listening, this is a reminder that navigating this era isn't just about learning how to spot a six-fingered AI deepfake or fact-checking a sensational headline.
It's much deeper than that.
It is. It's about recognizing the invisible walls of your own filter bubble. It's about actively choosing to step outside of it, embracing the friction of differing viewpoints, and really remembering the value of shared human experiences that an algorithm hasn't neatly curated for you.
Absolutely. And I want to leave you with one final, deeply provocative thought drawn from these texts that we haven't even touched on yet.
Oh, please do.
Consider the future of our collective memory. Historically, human societies formed their collective memory through active selection, debate, and the preservation of actual human records.
Right. Human historians doing human work.
But today, AI models are rapidly becoming our primary search engines and our default archivists.
Right. Instead of reading primary sources, we just ask the AI to summarize history for us.
Exactly. But as we discussed with diffusionization, these models hallucinate data. They mathematically flatten rich historical context into mere statistical noise just to generate a plausible-sounding answer. So, as these systems take over our archiving, what happens to history? Decades from now, will future generations looking back at today find a true human record? Or will they just find an algorithmically generated dream space, a synthetic hallucination of a past that never actually happened?
Man. If we don't fix the foundation of our shared reality now, we might not even be able to agree on where we've been, let alone where we are going.
It's a sobering thought.
It really is. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We invite you to check out the sources and keep exploring this for yourself.